Hello friends, welcome in to Simplify Piano Live. Today we are going to be talking about common problems that hinder progress. And this is part 2 because a couple of weeks ago we also talked about common problems that hinder progress, but it was a live stream that was so jam-packed full of information that we ran out of time. The hour ran out and there was still a lot of things to talk about. So we're going to touch on the same idea today, but we're going to go through a lot of different topics. We're going to be talking about common issues and solutions for piano technique, for rhythm, for performance anxiety, and so many other things. So thank you so much for being here. It's so awesome to have you. And before we jump in, I just wanted to tell you all, I'm not sure if you're new here, you might not know this. I used to talk about it a lot more, but I was thinking about this earlier today about like when I first started the channel back in the summer of 2021 and what the original purpose was. And it's funny because while the channel has morphed and changed and I've covered so many different topics, the original intent is still pretty much the same, just slightly different. So I started the channel back when I had a really large private studio, and my goal was to take all of the complex things that we talked about in lessons and create videos so that when my students went home to practice, they could watch the videos and refresh their memories so that I could make sure that they were getting the most out of their practice time. Because for a really long time, basically for as long as I've taught, it's been really clear that if I can teach a great lesson. I can show up and I can impart wisdom and I can get a student results right there in the moment. But if when they go home to practice on their own, they're not able to replicate that on their own, then it's all for nothing, right? Because most of the time that you spend doing music is by yourself at your own piano in your practice time. And that's true regardless of what level you are. Even if you're a professional and you're out playing concerts all the time, you're still doing more practice alone than you are, out performing. And it's especially true if you're in the first few years of piano study. Even if you have private lessons or you take group classes or you're in my Casual to Confident Piano Player program, like the most of your time is alone at the piano practicing. And so it's been really clear to me for a really long time that if people don't know what they're doing when they're alone during that practice time, it's not possible to get results. It's not possible to make progress in a long-term, meaningful way if you are unclear about what to do. So originally, I started the channel and I really just wanted to help my students with this. I was like, I can make these videos and they can watch them at home and it'll ensure that, in the 7 days between their lesson, they don't get off track and they can review those revolutionary practice methods and they'll stay on track. And then, the channel got some traction and now you are here and I want to do the same thing for you. So even though, you might not be a person that's in my Casual to Confident Piano Player program, you might not be one of my one-on-one students, but my goal is still the same. My goal is to make it so that when you are sitting there at your piano, you know what you're doing and you're making the most of your time so that you can get those measurable results and so that you can see and feel progress. Because when we see and feel progress, it's motivating, right? Like it's so motivating. It can honestly be like a really good, healthy addiction too, to get that progress and to feel that success and to want more of it. And it's when people aren't getting that things kind of break down and the whole process falls apart. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on that because today we're going to be talking about these common problems that hinder progress, and there's going to be room for questions. I opened it up to my Facebook group and on Instagram, and I asked people for some questions, and I jotted down some of the questions that I got, so we'll be sure to cover those today at the end of the live stream. But also, as we're going along, chime in the comments. Let me know if you have questions about what we're talking about. Let me know if you have questions that are completely unrelated to what we're talking about, because I want to help you make the most of your practice time. And I also want to make sure that everybody gets their questions answered. I promise you, if you have a question and you're scared to type it in the comments, I promise you there are so many other people out there that have the exact same question as you. I promise. So don't be afraid to comment and ask questions as we go along. So anyway, welcome in. Let me know who's here. Go ahead and comment. Let's see who's here and where you're from, and let's get started. Okay. So, actually, hang on. 2 quick announcements before we get started. So we're doing a live stream recital at 1 p.m. Pacific time on December 14th. I'm so excited. And this recital is like a thank you to all of you for being here, for showing up, for being amazing, and for putting in the time and the energy and the effort to improve your piano skills. It's going to just be a concert of whoever wants to play. Okay, I have some people that have already signed up, and I think I might have forgotten to put the link in the description, but I'll do that right after the live stream. If you want to sign up. It's just a Google form. Just fill it out and you are welcome to play. It's going to be so fun. If you've never seen a concert or like an event like this that I've put on, the vibe is always incredibly supportive. Doesn't matter what level you're at. Doesn't matter if you want to show up and play part of something. If your piece is not perfectly polished, that is okay. It's going to be so much fun, and it's going to be a really fun just event to connect with people. So that'll be in the description after the live stream. And then if you are like, no way, I could never do that because I have way too much performance anxiety, then next week is for you. I'm hosting a challenge and I'm super stoked about it. It's called Performance Anxiety to Performance Excitement. It's a 5-day challenge where we're going to meet every day at 9 a.m. Pacific time. I'm going to give you instructions and some wisdom about performance anxiety. I'm going to give you ways to practice so that by the end of the 5 days, you will have tools in your tool belt to deal with the performance anxiety that comes before the performance, and also to deal with all of the unexpected things that happen during a performance, and to hopefully help you stay calm and stay present so that you can still connect with your music and express yourself even though you're feeling really nervous. So that's going to be hosted in the Facebook group. The link is in the description for that. And you just show up in the Facebook group at 9 a.m. Pacific time on Monday. It's going to be really awesome. All right, let's see. Hello, Diane. Welcome in. Thought it was 1 p.m. Eastern. No, Pacific. I'm Pacific. All my times are always in Pacific. I try to clarify, but sometimes I forget. And then Lee, you have your first ever exam on Monday. You have last minute nerves and doubts. Any tips for last minute prep? You've done tons of practice. Lee, that is amazing. Absolutely. So just to touch on performance anxiety right here at the beginning. First of all, I love that you've done tons of practice, because when it comes to performing, there's always the two sides, right? There's like actually doing the work and preparing and making sure that you have put in the time and you have put in the effort and you are confident in that, you know, you've been practicing. That is very, very, very important, and don't underestimate the value of that. And then there's all the mindset stuff, the nonsense of the mind, as I say. And it's not nonsense I'm not saying nonsense because it's not important or because it's not significant. It's just nonsense because it's like we all deal with it. And if you've practiced, I want you to reassure yourself of that, first of all. I want you to make sure that you are not jumping on the train of thoughts of like, oh my gosh, what if I totally mess it up? Oh my gosh, what if everything falls apart? You can hear those thoughts, you can acknowledge those thoughts, you can thank those thoughts for being there. That's just your brain trying to protect you from doing something scary. But you don't have to listen to them. You can opt for other thoughts like, I know I can do this. I've practiced, I've put in the time, I'm confident, I can do this. And then the other thing that I really recommend, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the challenge next week, is to come up with a pre-performance routine. And this can take some experimenting. My performance routine is always that I'll sit down at the piano and I'll take 3 deep breaths. And while I'm taking those 3 deep breaths, I will sing the first phrase in my head over and over again to find my tempo. The breathing helps calm me, right? Oxygen is important. The oxygen is going to help your body stay calm. It also helps to deal with some of those physical things that happen. So it helps my hands to calm down a little bit. For me, my leg always shakes. And so when I do those 3 deep breaths, it helps my leg stop shaking and it just helps bring clarity. And then singing through the first phrase several times before I start helps me find my tempo, because I tend to rush when I'm nervous. And so when I sing it in my head that first time and I hear like how fast it is, I can check myself and slow it down before I'm actually playing. And it also allows you to get in the zone of what it is you're about to create. Because when you perform, you're creating something from nothing, right? Like there's no sound happening. And then all of a sudden, the second that your hands are on those keys, you've created this entire experience and this entire world. And so you have to be focused to do that. And singing through that first phrase is a very helpful way to get yourself in the game and to get yourself focused so that you can then create that sound and get the sound that you want out of the piano. So I hope that's helpful. Lee, we can talk more on it too later. I have a slide about performance anxiety. And then if you can, I know, I don't know what time your exam is on Monday, but go ahead and join that live stream in the Facebook group. That'll be really, really helpful for you. All right, let's dive into some other problems. And excuse me if I mute myself. I got sick last week and it's still present. All right, so we ran out of time. I kind of rushed through this slide in the last live stream, but it's such an important slide and such an important concept that I wanted to include it today because I didn't feel like I really did it justice in the last live stream. One of the most common issues that I see, especially with people that are coming back to piano after a long break or with people that have been learning on their own, is posture and or technique troubles. And I lump them together because before we can even think about technique, so before we can even think about like technical exercises or the proper technique to play a scale or the proper technique to play a lot of repeated octaves, we first have to be sitting correctly at the piano. Because if your posture is not correct, if you're not in alignment and you're not sitting correctly, your technique never has a chance, right? We have to have that proper posture before we work on technique, because otherwise we're not setting ourselves up to be able to do technique in any way that serves us. So with our posture, regardless of your level, even if you've been at this for a really long time, I want you to check in with your posture. And this is something that I have people do quite often. I would say once a month, at the very least, but maybe even once a week, just having a practice session where for like 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of your practice session, you're really checking in. You're adjusting the height of your bench and you're kind of reminding yourself of what the proper posture is, just to make sure that none of those bad habits are creeping in. Sometimes, it's like, I don't know, you slept funny. And so maybe you have a little bit of a crick in your neck. And so, your left shoulder is a little higher than the right shoulder. And then you practice like that for a couple of days. And then all of a sudden you have this bad habit that you didn't even realize that you had. But continuously checking in with piano posture will ensure that that doesn't happen. So we always go back to the basics, regardless of what level we're at. And the basics are, we want to make sure that we're sitting nice and tall. And the second that I start talking about posture with people, usually tension starts to creep in and people's shoulders start to kind of like hike up, or they start to get, tense and do funky things with their body. So we also want to make sure that we're breathing. So you can even do this with me right now. Go ahead and sit up nice and tall. Pretend like there's like a string that's pulling your head to the ceiling. But as you sit up nice and tall, check in with the various points of your body. So check in with your core and make sure that, your core is maybe a little bit tight, but that you're relaxed. Check in with your chest and your shoulders. Take a big breath. And make sure that you're not holding tension there. Make sure that your shoulders are down. Make sure that your neck isn't tense. And that's how you find that nice sitting tall position, but without holding tension in your body. We want to make sure that we are at the proper height. This one is so important, and it's really challenging if you don't have an adjustable bench. So I always recommend getting an adjustable bench if that's possible. If it's not possible, there are creative ways to solve the problems. I often will sit like quite high on a bench. And so when I was in college and I was traveling a lot to different competitions and performances and such, I would actually bring like this thing that my teacher made me at the time. It was like newspapers that she had sewed like a black cover around. It was like basically something that would prop me up on the bench. And that way I could ensure that even if the bench didn't go high enough, I could still sit at the proper height. So you can sit on books, you can, try to find a chair in your house that adjusts, but you want to be sitting at the proper height. And the way that you know that you're at the proper height is if when you go to put your hands on the keys, your elbow should make a 90-degree angle like this. And so you don't want a V and you don't want a straight line. You want that 90-degree angle or that uppercase L shape, and that's how you'll know that you're at the proper height. You also want to be at the proper distance. And this is another really, really, really big one that I see. I'll see like in piano player Facebook groups, people will share videos where they're sitting really far back like this, or where they're sitting like really, 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 really close. And ultimately, when it comes to the distance from the keys, we want to make sure that if we pick up our arms and rest our hands on the keys, that our arm is parallel with our torso. Okay? And we want to be kind of sitting up and down, straight up and down, but we don't want to lean back. Okay? You want to, if anything, you actually want to be a little bit leaning forward so that you can see everything that's going on. This puts your center of gravity in the center of the piano and close enough to the piano that you can reach all of the ranges that are required and you can move with flexibility and freedom. Center of the keyboard, I just said that. You want to make sure that you're in the center of the keyboard. And then we'll talk about hand position and the position of your hands on the keys. But first of all, when we're talking about that, Does any of that ring true for any of you? Did you see me do any of that and think to yourself like, oh no, I might be guilty of that one. Like maybe I lean out when I play, or maybe I lean in when I play. Go ahead and comment so we can kind of share about posture. It's one of the biggest things that prevents people from being able to play like fluidly and musically, is not sitting in that proper posture. So I recommend that I'll usually ask my students to just put a reminder in their phone, like my adult students. So like, every 3 weeks on Monday at 6 a.m., remind me when I'm doing my piano practice to, check in with my posture, or any version that will help you. Let's see. Evelyn is saying shoulders always creep up. I feel you there. That is totally my challenge as well. Shoulders creeping up is a really, really bad one for me too. It's so easy because it can happen without you even realizing it. And actually, in grad school, it happened to me a lot without me realizing it until later when I was dealing with like chronic shoulder pain, and I finally figured out why. So if you can catch it and be mindful of it and try to fix it now, that's great. Okay, so then that's just all in our body alignment, right? I haven't even really talked about our hands or our hand position. And when it comes to hand position, we want to make sure that we are playing with rounded fingers. And the example that I'll always use is if you hold your hand up like this in front of your face, you can see that your fingers are in a curve, right? Like they're kind of like an upside down U. And the shape of the piano is a straight line, okay? And so if we have our fingers flat, if we're playing our fingers flat like this on the piano, our fingers are in a U shape and we're trying to make them play on something that is in a straight line. And it's gonna be hard, and it's gonna be clunky, and it's gonna be complicated. But the second that I take my fingers that are in that U shape and I round them, look what happens. All of the sudden, my fingers are now in a straight line, my fingertips. And that's the part that I want to be using to play the piano anyway, is the tips of my fingers. And so now they're in a straight line and I can place them on the keys, and I'm setting myself up so that each finger can rest on a key without a lot of effort and without that clunkiness. So we want our fingers to be nice and rounded. We want to be playing on the fingertips. And I'll often see people play with flat fingers. So that's what I was just addressing. And then the next thing that I see too is people playing like this, where their fingers are kind of rounded, like they're like halfway rounded, but they're really playing on like the pads of their fingers, and it's still pretty flat. I couldn't really hold like a tennis ball in my hand if I wanted to, because my fingers are still too flat. And so I want to think about playing on the actual tips of my fingers, almost like I'm on the nail of my finger. And you can make these little O shapes with your thumb, and that will help you know if you're playing on the correct part of your finger or not. This is also when you discover if your nails are too long, because if you have, acrylic nails, or if your nails are really long, you won't be able to play on your fingertips, which is what we really want to do, and that's ideal. Now, when it comes to posture and technique with our hands and our wrists and our arms, we want a good rule of thumb and something to just keep in mind, a great base starting place for technique, is that you want less movement in the fingers and more movement elsewhere. So oftentimes I see this. People are like pressing each individual key, kind of like you're typing, and it's like, it's all about the finger moving, or maybe it looks more like this, but it's really like, I'm using my fingers and I am pressing each individual key with each individual finger. And in the beginning, this doesn't cause a lot of problems, because in the beginning we're going slow and we're playing really simple pieces. But once you graduate beyond the really simple pieces and you want to play anything with any sort of like fluidity or musicality or speed, that doesn't serve you anymore. And so from the very beginning stages, and at any stage that you are at now, you need to be making sure that your fingers are resting gently on the keys, and that it's the weight of your arm coming down that's helping to press every single key. Okay? And it's a combination. It's not that it's necessarily like always all of your arm weight and no finger movement. But it's a balance, and we want that balance to be there, because if we leave it only up to our fingers, we're going to be really limited in the sound that we can produce and in the amount of musicality that we can bring. And if we're only using the weights of our fingers, then it's like we can really start to just move too much, like more than is necessary. So it is a combination, but you want to find that good balance of arm weight and of finger motion. And a great way to do this is to utilize the wrist and to get really comfortable and flexible with your wrist and to make sure that your wrist isn't tense. So a great exercise for this is to sit at your piano and allow your wrist to be very floppy, very relaxed, and drop into the piano keys and allow your wrist to really dramatically drop, like so much so that it's touching, the wood of the piano. And you can just practice this dropping motion. You can also stay in the keys and do this up-down motion. This is one of the exercises that I'll actually teach people in Casual to Confident. For like 20 seconds. Don't do this longer than about 20 or 30 seconds, but it can help you get in touch with that idea of a flexible wrist. And so then when you go to play, if your fingers are rounded like we talked about, and you're on the edge of the keys, you can't see my hand there. If your fingers are rounded and you're on the edge of the keys and I have a loose wrist, the tone quality that I can get out of the piano is so much more beautiful. The way that I can connect or detach the notes, I have more control to do that, so I can play so much more expressively. And also, I can have such a greater control of dynamics and a greater dynamic range because I'm utilizing the weight of my arm and I'm not just leaving it up to my individual fingers. All right, so I know there's a lot. That was a lot jam-packed into that slide, and we spend a lot of time talking about this in the Casual to Confident Piano Player program. When people come to group classes and they play for me, and we make these little tweaks that make huge differences in the way that people sound, because it's so important, and it's one of those things that's hard to address unless you have someone watching you and telling you, which tweaks to make. But let me know if you have questions, and go ahead and comment and let me know if any of this is something that you struggle with. Do you struggle to play with rounded fingers? Do you struggle to stay on the edge of the keys? Do you struggle to utilize other parts of your arm? And, are you mostly moving your fingers? Go ahead and comment and let me know if you have any questions. We can definitely touch on them. Okay, so another big common area that hinders progress is this need for speed. And I totally get it. I am not a super patient person. I don't know. I mean, I do know. It came from like a lifetime of playing the piano and developing the patience. But outside of piano, I totally get it. Like, we want information fast. We want results fast. We want to be able to accomplish a lot in a little bit amount of time. And I see it a lot. I see it come up in piano a lot, especially with adults, because we're used to like being able to kind of, for the most part, like handle tasks that are assigned to us or handle the things that we need to handle. And so there's this idea that getting fast results and making fast progress is the most important thing. And I see people getting really frustrated with themselves if they're not seeing those immediate results or that immediate progress. Now, part of this is that you can get fast results and you can get fast progress if you're practicing correctly. So if you know the methods to use and if you know what to do during that practice time, the results do come faster and that progress does happen faster. But ironically, you get those faster results and that faster progress by not focusing on speed. Okay, because the second that we start to think about, okay, I want to play this whole piece and I want to play it quickly, or, I expect, and it might even be an unchecked expectation that you have. Like, you just have it in your head that like you want to be able to play the whole piece and maybe you didn't put a timeline on it, but you're getting really hard on yourself about why it's not happening soon enough or fast enough. And the second that we can let go of speed as the goal and we can allow ourselves to just trust in the process and focus on accuracy and focus on playing things correctly and focus on utilizing practice methods that will work, even if it means we have to practice really small sections really slowly. If we can do those things, it always will get you that speed. It will give you those faster results and that faster progress. And it seems so counterintuitive, but I have seen it thousands of times and it works. If you can just simplify, focus on accuracy, focus on smaller goals, you will reach those larger goals so much faster. Now, let me know if you are a person who has maybe even unknowingly beat themselves up because you're not doing something fast enough. I'm really curious to know who's brave enough to comment and let us know, because it's something I probably hear this one, like, I'm not gonna lie, probably 4 times a week. I hear like, why is this not going faster? Why can't I do this? I should be able to do this. And maybe people aren't saying faster, but that's the implication, is like, I should be able to do this. Why can't I? All right. So slowing down, focusing on accuracy. A great way to do that is to ask yourself, or to make the goal 95% accuracy 95% of the time. That's a really great way to do it. Evelyn says, of course, guilty. Thank you for your bravery, Evelyn. That's awesome. You're not alone. We all do it. That's the thing. It's like, it's something that we all do. Okay, so musicality. Musicality is complex because there's so many things that go into musicality, but there are definitely some ways that you can simplify the process and that you can get yourself playing more musically faster or more musically even starting today. And so I just want to touch on a couple of ideas for troubles with musicality. So sorry, you can see I have a heated blanket. This is my most exciting purchase of the year so far, is a heated blanket that I keep at my piano, and it's been lovely. Okay, so practice dynamics and musicality just like you practice anything else. So when it comes to musicality and expression in music, there's kind of this idea that it's improvised or that it's done on the spot, that like, you practice, but then when you're performing, you're just like so in the moment and you just express yourself. And that's like 10% of it. But the other 90% of it is that you've actually taken the time to think about the dynamics and to write them in your music and to practice them just like you would practice anything else. Because you want those dynamics and you want that sense of musicality, like the articulation and all of the things that contribute to the musicality. You want those things to be so solidly in your memory, a part of the piece, that even if you forget to think about them, even if you're distracted, even if you like are counting and you kind of forget about the dynamics for a second, your hands still do them because they've been practiced into the piece just like everything else. And so my first tip for musicality is practice it. If you're struggling to be expressive or you're struggling to play musically, go in your piece and ask yourself, how could I be more musical? And I'll tell you, one of the easiest ways to do that is to take any dynamics that are in the score and times them by 10 and just exaggerate them a lot. If you've ever seen someone, I give this analogy a lot, so you might have heard me say this before, but if you are familiar with the concept of stage makeup, like if someone is in a play or a musical and they're going to be on stage, it's a lot of makeup. If you've ever seen someone backstage, it's kind of jarring because you see them close up, face to face, and you're like, whoa, that it can look like clown makeup. But then when you're sitting in the audience of the auditorium and you're watching someone on a stage, it doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like they're wearing that much makeup because they're so far away and they're a little bit removed. But then, of course, once you're up close and personal, you can see how dramatic the makeup is. And it's the same thing with dynamics. We often see a forte in our score, we see a piano in our score, and we think like, okay, I'll do the forte, I'll do the piano, and we like kind of do it. But maybe you can hear it, maybe, but the chances are that by the time the sound, is out of your head and into your fingers and out of the piano, it's been lost in translation and nobody else can hear those dynamics, or you can't hear and feel them as much as you want to. So exaggerating your dynamics is always a good idea. I've never, ever, ever heard someone say, judge or like review article, I've never heard someone be like, oh, the concert was great, but I thought the performer was a little too dramatic. Like you don't hear that because there's no such thing as too much musicality or too much expression in music. That's what it's there for. So exaggerate those dynamics, and that's going to really help bring a very mature level of musicality to your playing. Another great way to work on musicality is to get in touch with the melody. So most pieces, not all, but most pieces have a melody. Even if you're playing something super atonal, there's something that is going to be brought out as the main voice if it's not, directly a melody. So get yourself in touch with what that is. Sing along with it. And when you sing along with it, even if you're not a singer, it trains you to match what you're hearing internally with what's going on externally. And so oftentimes, like, we have an idea of how we want something to sound in our head, but singing it will help you bridge that gap between what's going on and how you want it to sound and what you're actually getting out of the piano. Now, the other side of that is that sometimes when we're learning a piece, we're so caught up on like all of the complications of learning a piece, like the rhythms and the notes and the fingerings and all of that, and we lose the melody. And maybe we're playing chords, or maybe it's not super clear where the melody is at. And so when you make yourself slow down and sing the melody, you train your ear to hear where the melody is. And when you can hear where the melody is, you're naturally going to bring it out because it's what you're listening to. So singing along with the melody is a really great way to amp up your musicality. You can also listen and copy. This is a great way too. If you are struggling with musicality, listen to 5 different people play the piece that you're learning and notice what you don't like, notice what you do like, and copy what you do like. And imitate the dramatic and musical artist that you want to be, because while it might start as imitation, within a day or two, it's going to turn into your rendition of the musicality in that piece. So that's a really great practice technique. And then lastly, don't give up, because, you know, it's complicated. Sometimes there's a lot to focus on when we're learning a piece of music, and it's a lot to process and a lot for our brains to keep track. And so if you are having an unmusical day, that's okay. We all have unmusical days or unmusical weeks or phases where we go through and like maybe your work right now is really getting clear and getting better on rhythm and your musicality is kind of taking a hit, and that's okay because the learning process is not always a straight upward trajectory. You know, we have little ebbs and flows. And so just you can reassure yourself that, you know, if you're not sounding musical right now, that doesn't mean that you don't have the capabilities of being musical. That doesn't mean that you're not an expressive person. It just means that right now that's a struggle and you can work on that and you can fix it. All right, Diane, I'm not sure when you wrote this, but you had to break that habit. You are not a fast pianist. Maybe that was when I was talking about speed, but that's good. That's good that you know that you're not a fast pianist because you can just allow yourself to go slow. Any questions or comments on musicality? Of course, there are like thousands of other ideas of how to practice musicality. And I did a musicality challenge, a 5-day challenge a couple months ago in the Facebook group. And so if that's something that you're interested in, you can join that Facebook group and go back and search for that challenge because it's still up there. We went over a lot of ways to practice musicality. All right, I'm going to skip this one. Well, no, I'll do rhythm. I'll do rhythm. I'll be the bad guy and I'll talk about rhythm. Excuse me, one second. All right, so rhythm is often like the sneaky culprit or the sneaky thing that's hindering your progress. And I say that because it's not always obvious that it is in fact rhythm that is the problem. However, rhythm is the problem of so many problems. And so this is a really big one. And oftentimes rhythm, it's not just about rhythm. So when we are looking at a piece of music and we're counting out loud and we're using the metronome, it's not just about accurately playing the rhythm. That is part of it. And that is an important part of it. Of course, we want to be playing the rhythms accurately. But the other thing that is really important about rhythm that I think people miss often is that rhythm provides structure. Counting out loud and using the metronome provides a structure that your brain can use to organize all of the complex information that it is processing. And when we don't have that structure, it leads to repeated mistakes, lots of pauses in playing. It can lead to memory lapses. It can lead to a lack of musicality. It can lead to that awful phenomenon where like you really work on something and then the next day you go to sit down and you're like, what? I did this perfectly yesterday. Why is it like I never practiced it? That's usually rhythm. So it can really lead to a lot of common problems, even if it's not obvious that rhythm is the culprit behind those problems. And so I really am an advocate for practicing rhythm. And most of the people that I work with have some sort of rhythm practice, whether it's a couple times a week or a couple minutes during every single practice session where they're, you know, like tapping and counting rhythm with the metronome and counting out loud. I really recommend that you practice rhythm at least a few times each week, if not every practice session, just for a few minutes. It doesn't need to be huge. You don't need to add an hour of rhythm practice onto your rhythm or onto your practice, but just 2 minutes or 3 minutes. You know, and it can be really simple. It could be like taking one line in a piece you're already working on and just turning on the metronome and tapping and counting out loud. Doesn't have to be a huge deal, but just creating that space for you to really focus on rhythm is going to, if you do it consistently, solve so many other problems. And it's kind of shocking how many problems it solves once you start addressing it. The other thing that I will recommend a lot is Rhythmic Training by Robert Starr. That's an amazing book. It's a super inexpensive book. The link is below for that one. And it starts at the very beginning. So even if you're like, I'm a lost cause, there's no way, I can't do rhythm, I've made it this far, there's no way, Robert Starr has got your back. The book starts at the very, very, very beginning. and works up through levels. There are people that I have used this book with that have like no sense of rhythm, that then within a few months become really, really solid rhythmically. You can also, if you don't want to get the rhythmic training book, you can also go back to maybe some of your easy books. Like maybe when you first started piano, you have like an old level book or something like that. You can go back to an easier book and just practice clapping and counting those examples out loud. And lastly, this is kind of a fun one. It's a game, so it's geared towards kids, but I've used it with adults all the time. The Rhythm Cat app is super fun. It has a metronome, it has backing tracks, and it's a really fun way to practice rhythm, especially if you're kind of terrified of the idea of practicing rhythm, or you're really against that idea. Rhythm Cat might be a great place for you to start because it's super fun and super easy, and you could build that practice of addressing rhythm. All right, everybody, let's get some comments about rhythm going in the chat. I'm gonna get a drink of water. Okay, so I wanted to touch a little bit on troubleshooting problems. So, some methods that you all could use just when things are going wrong and you're maybe not quite sure why or not quite sure how, but they're going wrong, and you want to fix them, because these troubleshooting techniques can really help most things. So oftentimes, this first one is exactly what we were just talking about. If you are struggling in a section of a piece and you're not sure why and you're not sure how to fix it, make yourself count it out loud. It will initially probably make it seem harder, but that's not because of the counting, and that's not because counting is bad. That's because you don't know exactly what's going on, and you're probably a little bit unclear about exactly how the hands are fitting together and exactly where every single note goes together. It's like choreographing a dance, and if you're not counting out loud, you're really leaving it up to chance. It's like telling a bunch of dancers, like, okay, just like, feel the music, and like, what it sounds like, right? And what moves you're doing, so just do it. Like that's the equivalent of the directions that you're giving to your hands if you're not counting out loud. But when you're counting out loud, you're saying, okay, you're going to go down on beat 1, and then you're going to go up on the and of 2. You over here, you're also going to go down on beat 1, but you're going to hold through beat 4. And you over here, and you're giving really clear directions. And so it's so much easier to choreograph. So if you have an issue and you don't know how to solve it, count out loud. I promise you it's going to make it worse for a couple minutes until you understand what you're doing, and then it's going to make it so much better, and it's going to solve a lot of problems. 2, go slow. And this touches on a little bit of an earlier slide, but oftentimes we're just going too fast. It's just too complicated. There's a lot to process at the same time when we're trying to learn a piece or when we're trying to play through a piece, and if you're making a lot of mistakes or things aren't sounding good and you don't know why, do it at half tempo. Or slow down just a little bit, and that often can just clear up enough space in your brain that it solves a lot of problems. Focus on accuracy, so make the goal to play at 95% accuracy, 95% accurate 95% of the time. And when you change your goal to be that, oftentimes you'll have to slow down or you'll have to focus on a smaller section. And so that really helps solve problems as well. Using the post-it method is amazing. I think by now a lot of you know what the post-it method is because I talk about it endlessly. But if you don't, you can check out, I think it was last week's live stream where I talked about it. Or I have a whole video on it as well. And you can check that out. I can put the link in the description. Try to explain it to someone else. Now this one is good. And I see Donnell popping in the chat here. And Donnell, actually, since you just popped in the chat, it's funny because you and so many other people that I've done this with were the inspiration for this number. So Donnell was in a class the other day, and we were working through a problem in one of her pieces, and I was asking her to narrate out loud what she was doing as she was playing it, which is really hard to do. It's hard to talk and play at the same time. But ultimately, what it does is it forces you to bring a level of awareness to what you're doing. And it's the same as when you try to explain it to someone else. So if you're having problems in a piece and you don't know why, take a second and take your hands off the piano and pretend like there's someone there, or pull someone in the room with you and teach that section of music to them. Explain to them how it sounds, how you play it, when the hands play, and exactly what they should do if they wanted to play it. And oftentimes that will help you get clear on what's going on, or it'll make you realize exactly the spot that you don't know. Because if you're trying to explain it to someone else and you can't, it becomes clear why you can't. It becomes clear what you're missing or what information you're lacking in order to be able to explain it to someone else. So it's a great way to troubleshoot a problem. Let's see, Donnell saying, I know when I sat down to practice, it surprised me that putting the rhythm in both hands and just counting actually helps you get the notes too. Yes, it's so surprising because it seems counterintuitive, especially if you've been the kind of person who like tries to count and then makes more mistakes and gives up. And there's so many people, you're not alone if that is you. That used to be me. I used to do that too, because counting out loud does seemingly cause more problems, but it's not. It's just, it's making your brain organize things. And so the process can be painful, just like if you wanted to organize a room in your house. It's like the process of pulling everything out of the closet, going through all the stuff, deciding what you're going to keep, deciding what you're going to throw away. Like that isn't necessarily an enjoyable process, but the result is so enjoyable. And it's the same with counting out loud. When you start counting out loud, it can be like you're showing all the secrets, like you're having to pull out all the old junk and you're having to look at everything, and it makes it worse for a minute, but power through and keep doing it, and it makes it so much easier. Donnell, thank you so much for sharing. And then lastly, think of yourself as a detective and a doctor. So you're a detective in piano practice because you're always trying to look at things in different ways. And you're always trying to kind of like scope out, what's going on, what's working, what's not working. And then you're a doctor because you're trying to diagnose and you're trying to say like, okay, I know here in this measure that I keep playing wrong notes. What are some things that could solve that problem? What's a prescription that I could write myself to help solve that problem or to help solve that issue? And it's a practice. Not only are we practicing like a specific piece of music when we're practicing, we're also honing our detective and doctor skills of being able to, find where those mistakes are, troubleshoot and kind of question what's going wrong and what might be causing it, and then maybe trying to prescribe ourselves a solution. And the only way that you get better at that is practicing it. Trying out stuff, noticing if it works, noticing if it doesn't work, and then reevaluating and trying again. And so thinking about yourself as a detective and a doctor can help kind of leave the ego out of it and give yourself that space to play around and to think of it as more experimental so that you can learn what works and what doesn't work. All right, I've got some questions here up on the screen. These are questions that people asked on Instagram and in the Facebook group. And then if you have questions, now would be the time to type those in the chat as well, because we have some time. And so I'm very happy to address any questions that come up right now as well. So one of the questions was how, in sight reading, how to make sure that the rhythm is correct and how to deal with ledger lines in sight reading. Whew. And ledger lines are not fun. They just like, if you're like me, then you see them and you get nervous, even though I know what they are and I know I can read them. It's like somewhere back in my child brain from when I first encountered ledger lines, like they just cause stress. And so this is two separate issues, and for correct rhythms, especially in sight reading, like if you're someone that's like looking at new music often and playing new music, I would say incorporating rhythm into your daily practice or your weekly practice would be a huge priority for sure. Don't underestimate how valuable that would be and how much that would help you in your rhythm sight reading. Because when you're practicing rhythm, not only are you doing all the things that we already talked about earlier, you're also familiarizing yourself with the common patterns that you see. And you're making your visual memory stronger so that when you see rhythms come up in music, you have a context of what they sound like, what they feel like, how you count them. And so practicing rhythm each day actually really helps your ability to quickly interpret and reproduce a rhythm correctly. So I would incorporate rhythm into your practice. And then for the ledger lines, this might sound like silly and simple, but I would honestly get flashcards. It's never too late to use flashcards. They work for all ages and all levels. And if you know that ledger lines cause you stress, if you know that ledger lines are something that trip you up in your sight reading, then get a set of flashcards for $5 and drill the heck out of those ledger lines until they're no longer an issue. It would probably take you 5 minutes a day for 2 weeks before you'd be like 100% solid with those ledger lines. So that's what I would recommend for that. Let's see, appropriate amount of time to practice. Yeah, so this was a question of like how to know how much time to practice each day. And this is a tough question. It's one that I've addressed. I've done a couple live streams on this, like about, creating a practice routine. And of course, when we're creating a practice routine, time is always one of the main factors, because your routine should definitely fit into what's realistic for your life and for your goals and all of that. And so I would say, as a blanket statement, for beginners, I say like 20 to 30 minutes a day, 3 to 6 times a week. For intermediate, I say like 30 to 45 minutes, same thing, 3 to 6 days a week. For advanced, I would say like at least an hour a day, 3 to 6 times a week. And I know that that's like a very large range, but that's the easiest, most blanket answer I can give you. Now, within that is a lot of caveats because you don't necessarily have to practice that much to make progress. And depending on what your goals are, you can practice for much shorter amounts of time and achieve very small goals, and it just changes your long-term timeline. I would say also, if you're struggling with issues like motivation or nonsense of the mind, like those mindset issues that creep in, then we would make adjustments to that. So sometimes if people come to me and they are struggling to get to the piano each day, and they're like, I really want to learn how to play the piano, but I'm not even practicing at all, then I say, okay, let's set a goal that's like wildly simple, wildly achievable. Something that when you hear it, it sounds so easy that you can accomplish it. So maybe that goal is task-oriented, like I'm going to sit down and I'm going to practice one line of one song each day. Or maybe it's a time goal. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to practice 5 minutes each day. Something that feels very, 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 very easy. And I would recommend utilizing that tool whenever you need it. If you're struggling with motivation as a whole, if you're struggling with motivation on a specific day, if you are not feeling like practicing, you can switch your routine up and you can switch the amount of time to what works for you, you as a whole person, and that takes into account how you're feeling that day. And that takes into account your long-term goals, your short-term goals, but also, what's going on with you in that moment. And do you want practice to feel like torture, or do you want it to be exciting and to have it feel easy? And sometimes it needs to feel easy in order to get to the piano. So I know that's not like, I could talk for hours about that, but that's something. I hope that answers your question. And then I would say check out, I have a Simplify Piano Live called Practice Routines. And if you just go to my channel and search routines, you're going to find so many great suggestions for different time suggestions and also ways to create routines that will be really helpful. Okay. Performance anxiety. So there was a question about this at the beginning that we did answer, and I'm not sure, maybe Lee, maybe you were the one that asked the question on Instagram too, but we touched on it a little bit today, and then I'm going to actually leave that one for the challenge that I'm doing next week in the Facebook group. So if you want to get in on that challenge, it's totally free. It's free, and it's at 9 a.m. each day. The live streams won't be super long. They're usually like about 15 minutes, and during those live streams, one, I teach you about performance anxiety. So we're going to talk about like what it is, why you have it, and then I give you tools. And I ask you, I'll give you a practice assignment for that day. And each day the practice assignment builds on the last day so that by the end of the 5 days, you walk away with like a whole set of brand new information that can be really helpful for turning performance anxiety into performance excitement. And for, getting tools of ways to deal with that anxiety before the performance and also the unexpected things that happen during the performance. I've done these challenges on simplifying your success, like, focusing in on practice. And I did a challenge on musicality, and people get really cool results when they show up each day and they actually do the assignments. So if you are struggling with performance anxiety, welcome to being human, but also join that challenge so that you can learn some ways to deal with it. All right, everybody, I did not see any questions come in through the comments, so I'm going to go ahead and leave you all with that. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me. I love doing these lives, and go ahead, I'm going to go put the link in the description right now for the Google form if you want to join in that live stream recital. It's going to be so cool. It's going to be very encouraging. I would love to have you there. So, amazing work, everybody. Happy practicing. I will talk to you all soon. Bye.